At 85 years old, Smokey Robinson remains one of the most enduring names in American music history. His velvet voice, poetic lyrics, and unforgettable stage presence transformed not just Motown, but the entire soundscape of popular music. Yet behind the spotlight, awards, and recognition lies a heartbreaking truth: the tragedy of growing old while watching the world you helped build slowly slip away. Smokey's story is not just one of triumph and celebration, it is also one of profound personal struggle, deep loss, and the relentless weight of time. When fans think of Smokey Robinson, they think of joy, his soulful ballads like Cruisin, the shimmering harmonies of the Miracles, or timeless songs he penned for others. But today, at 85, the story has shifted. Smokey has lived long enough to watch his closest friends and collaborators pass away. He has carried the burden of addiction, survived health crises, and faced the reality of a voice that once soared effortlessly, now growing frail with age. In this video, we will explore both the glory and the tragedy. By the end, the tears we shed are not only for Smokey Robinson's struggles, but also for what his story represents: the fragile, fleeting nature of life itself. William Smokey Robinson Jr. was born on February 19, 1940, in Detroit, Michigan, a city that would one day become synonymous with music, ambition, and heartbreak. His upbringing was modest. Raised in Detroit's North End, Smokey lived in a neighborhood where families struggled but carried within them an unbreakable determination. The streets were tough, but they were also filled with sounds: blues records spilling out of living room windows, gospel choirs echoing from local churches, and rhythm and blues crackling through radios late at night. Smokey's mother, Flossie, was the central figure of his early life. His father, William Robinson Sr., worked various jobs to keep the household afloat, but it was Flossie who nurtured Smokey's early love of words and melody. She died tragically when Smokey was just 10 years old, leaving a scar that would remain with him forever. From that point, his older sister Geraldine stepped in as a guiding figure, helping to raise him and keep him focused. Music became Smokey's escape and salvation. As a young boy, he was fascinated by the records of Nolan Strong and the Diablos, Clyde McPhatter, and Billy Ward's Dominoes. He soaked up their harmonies and vocal stylings, teaching himself how to sing by mimicking their voices. It wasn't long before Smokey's natural tenor voice and uncanny gift for writing lyrics set him apart from other kids in the neighborhood. By the time he entered high school, Smokey had already formed his first group, initially called the Five Chimes. The lineup shifted and evolved, eventually settling into what would become the Matadors, the group that later transformed into the Miracles. Even then, Smokey was the leader, not because he demanded it, but because everyone could see he had the rare ability to combine raw talent with vision. Life in Detroit was not easy. Smokey and his friends faced poverty and uncertainty every day. But Smokey carried within him a dream that felt bigger than the factories and assembly lines that dominated his city. He didn't just want to sing, he wanted to write songs that would live forever. What he didn't know then was that this dream would soon collide with another dreamer in Detroit, and together, they would change the course of American music. Smokey Robinson's life changed forever in the late 1950s when he crossed paths with a man named Berry Gordy Jr. At the time, Smokey was performing with his group, then called the Matadors, at local talent shows around Detroit. They had raw energy and a loyal local following, but they lacked the polish and professional guidance to break out nationally. Enter Berry Gordy. Gordy was an ambitious songwriter and entrepreneur with a vision of creating a record company that would rival the big labels of New York and Los Angeles. He saw in Detroit something others did not: a pool of untapped African American talent capable of producing music that could cross racial boundaries and capture mainstream America. When Gordy first heard Smokey and his group audition, it wasn't just the singing that caught his attention, it was the notebook Smokey carried. Inside were nearly 100 songs, carefully written and preserved by a teenager who had an almost obsessive drive to express himself through music. Gordy was stunned. Here was a young man not only with a voice but also with the songwriting brilliance that could fuel an entire movement. That first meeting sparked a partnership that would define both of their lives. Gordy became a mentor, guiding Smokey through the mechanics of songwriting, arrangement, and the business of music. Smokey, in turn, became Gordy's most trusted collaborator, his golden pen. In 1959, Gordy founded Tamla Records, which would soon grow into Motown. The Miracles' first hit for the label, Shop Around, became Motown's first million-selling single in 1960. It was Smokey's lyrics, simple yet poetic, heartfelt yet universal, that resonated with audiences. He wrote songs that spoke to the human experience: love, heartbreak, longing, and hope. The success of Shop Around launched Motown onto the national stage, and it marked the beginning of an empire. For Smokey, it was a dream come true, but it was also the start of unimaginable pressure. He was no longer just a singer with a group of friends. He was now a central figure in a company that aimed to revolutionize the music industry. What followed was the rise of Motown as a cultural force, and at its center stood Smokey Robinson, a young man from Detroit who had once sung into a mirror, now writing songs that the entire world would sing. As the 1960s dawned, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles became the heartbeat of Motown's rapidly expanding empire. Their success with Shop Around was only the beginning. Soon came a cascade of hits: You've Really Got a Hold on Me, Mickey's Monkey, Oh Baby Baby, and The Tracks of My Tears. Each release cemented Smokey's reputation as both a singer with a velvet tone and a songwriter with a poet's soul. The Miracles stood out because they were more than just another vocal group. Their harmonies were rich and textured, but it was Smokey's tender falsetto that gave them a unique signature. Unlike many male leads of the time who sang with power and grit, Smokey's voice was gentle, almost conversational, but it carried an emotional weight that listeners couldn't ignore. On stage, the Miracles exuded a kind of polished charm that reflected Motown's signature style: choreographed steps, sharp suits, and smooth charisma. Behind the scenes, Smokey was writing almost constantly. His songs often emerged from scraps of conversations, observations of everyday life, and deep wells of personal feeling. The 1960s were a time of social change, but Smokey's music provided a bridge between generations. His songs didn't just dominate the black charts, they crossed over, winning fans in white suburban households and on mainstream radio. This crossover success was exactly what Berry Gordy envisioned when he founded Motown, and Smokey was his most trusted weapon in the pursuit of that dream. But even amid the glittering success, pressure was mounting. As Motown grew, so did the expectations on Smokey's shoulders. He wasn't just performing with the Miracles, he was writing hits for others, mentoring younger artists, and shouldering the weight of keeping Motown at the top of the charts. If Berry Gordy was the architect of Motown, Smokey Robinson was its poet laureate. His gift for words was unparalleled, and his ability to translate emotion into song was nothing short of extraordinary. Bob Dylan once called him America's greatest living poet, a statement that stunned Smokey but perfectly captured his genius. Consider The Tracks of My Tears. The song's imagery, smiles masking heartbreak, hidden sorrow revealed only by the tracks of my tears, resonated with millions. It was a masterclass in storytelling through music. But Smokey's brilliance wasn't confined to his own group. He wrote My Guy for Mary Wells, a playful yet steadfast declaration of devotion that became one of her biggest hits. For The Temptations, he penned My Girl, a song that remains one of the most iconic love songs ever written. He also contributed to the success of Marvin Gaye with Ain't That Peculiar and I'll Be Doggone. What made Smokey unique was his ability to capture universal feelings with elegant simplicity. He didn't need complex metaphors or heavy-handed storytelling. His lyrics felt conversational, like whispers of truth carried in melody. His songs were intimate yet accessible, personal yet universal. By the mid-1960s, Smokey was Motown's most prolific songwriter. He wasn't just shaping hits, he was shaping the very identity of the label. Artists turned to him not only for songs but also for guidance, as his calm demeanor and gentle wisdom made him both a mentor and a friend. Still, this era of triumph came with its own cost. The endless demands of writing, recording, and touring left Smokey little time for himself. He was, in many ways, the engine behind Motown's success, but engines run hot, and eventually they wear down. Behind the polished smiles and chart-topping success, Smokey Robinson was a man grappling with the relentless demands of fame. His marriage to Claudette Rogers, a fellow member of the Miracles, brought both joy and strain. Claudette was not only his partner in life but also on stage. Yet the grueling tour schedule, constant recording sessions, and Smokey's ever-expanding responsibilities at Motown often kept them apart. The couple suffered heartbreak in their personal lives as well. Claudette endured multiple miscarriages due to the physical toll of touring, a pain she carried quietly while supporting Smokey's career. Though they eventually welcomed children, the losses they experienced left lasting scars on their marriage. At the same time, Smokey was navigating the pressures of being both an artist and an executive. Berry Gordy relied heavily on him, even appointing him as Motown's vice president. Smokey's days were filled with boardroom meetings, studio sessions, and late-night writing marathons. He was expected to deliver hits not just for himself but for nearly everyone on the Motown roster. The weight of these dual roles took a toll. Smokey began to feel stretched thin, caught between the demands of his music, his leadership position, and his personal life. The very success he had dreamed of as a young boy in Detroit was now becoming a burden. Yet, despite the pressures, Smokey remained outwardly graceful. His charm, kindness, and humility endeared him to everyone who crossed his path. Fans saw the smiling performer who could melt hearts with a single lyric, but few saw the exhaustion, the sacrifices, and the quiet pain that fame carried with it. The 1960s cemented Smokey Robinson's place in music history, but they also planted the seeds of struggle. The world saw him as Motown's golden boy, but behind the scenes, Smokey was learning that even legends pay a price for greatness. By the early 1970s, Smokey Robinson found himself at a crossroads. After years of leading the Miracles and carrying much of Motown's creative weight, he felt the pull of change. Touring had worn him down, the responsibilities of Motown's executive offices consumed his energy, and the desire to spend more time with his growing family weighed heavily on his heart. In 1972, Smokey officially left the Miracles, handing the group's future to Billy Griffin while setting his sights on a solo career. At first, the transition was uncertain. Fans wondered whether Smokey could thrive without the group that had defined his career. His early solo albums, Smokey, 1973 and Pure Smokey, 1974, were warmly received but didn't set the charts ablaze. Still, Smokey's dedication never wavered. He poured his energy into refining his sound, blending the classic Motown feel with new influences emerging in R&B and soul. His persistence paid off in 1979 with Where There's Smoke and the breakout single Cruisin. The song became a defining moment in his solo journey, sensual, hypnotic, and timeless. In the early 1980s, Smokey struck again with Being With You, which topped charts around the world and proved that he didn't need the Miracles to stay relevant. This new era was liberating. Smokey explored mature themes in his lyrics, writing from a place of lived experience rather than youthful innocence. He experimented with contemporary production styles, collaborating with a new generation of musicians. Though his voice had aged slightly, its distinctive sweetness and falsetto remained intact, captivating old fans and winning new ones. But even as he enjoyed solo success, shadows loomed on the horizon. The 1980s would test Smokey Robinson in ways no audience could imagine, pushing him to the brink of tragedy before he would find redemption. To the public, Smokey Robinson was the epitome of smooth, effortlessly stylish, endlessly charming, and seemingly untouchable. But behind the flawless performances and award-winning records, Smokey was battling a darkness that threatened to consume him. In the early 1980s, Smokey fell into the grip of cocaine addiction. At first, it was recreational, part of the nightlife culture surrounding the entertainment industry. But what began as an indulgence spiraled into dependency. The drug dulled his pain, quieted his anxieties, and numbed the pressures of being a legend expected to always shine. Soon, his personal and professional life began to unravel. His once perfect voice faltered, his health declined, and his relationships strained. Friends and colleagues noticed the change but were often powerless to intervene. The man who had written about love and resilience with such clarity was now lost in a haze of addiction. The breaking point came in the mid-1980s when Smokey nearly lost his life. Weakened by the constant abuse of his body, he faced a devastating health crisis that shocked those closest to him. Doctors warned that if he didn't stop, he would not survive. Smokey himself later admitted that he felt he was walking a path toward death. But what saved him was faith. In 1986, after years of turmoil, Smokey had a spiritual awakening. He described hearing God's voice, an experience that shook him to his core and gave him the strength to walk away from drugs without formal rehab. He later credited this moment with saving not only his career but his very life. The world would never know just how close Smokey Robinson came to being another tragic story of fame destroyed by addiction. His recovery was nothing short of miraculous, but it left scars, reminders of how fragile even the strongest voices can be when weighed down by pain. Emerging from the shadow of addiction, Smokey Robinson began to rebuild, not only his career but also his spirit. The late 1980s marked a period of renewal. He openly discussed his struggles, using his story to warn others of the dangers of drugs. His honesty was disarming. Fans admired not just his music, but his courage in admitting his vulnerability. Smokey's redemption was mirrored in his music. His 1987 album One Heartbeat became a commercial success, fueled by hits like Just to See Her and One Heartbeat. The former won him a Grammy Award for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance, a recognition that felt like validation after years of turmoil. Beyond the charts, Smokey embraced a role as a mentor and elder statesman of music. He guided younger artists, appeared at benefit concerts, and lent his voice to causes he believed in. His faith grew stronger, and he often spoke about God's role in saving him. For a man who had nearly lost everything, gratitude became the foundation of his daily life. Yet, even in redemption, there was heartbreak. The music industry had changed, and Smokey sometimes struggled to keep pace with evolving sounds. While he remained beloved, his commercial dominance was fading. More painfully, he was forced to confront the end of his marriage to Claudette Rogers, a relationship that had spanned decades but could not withstand the strains of fame, loss, and his battles with addiction. Still, Smokey refused to let tragedy define him. He returned to the stage with renewed vigor, his voice, though weathered, still capable of moving audiences to tears. Fans who watched him perform in the late 80s and 90s often remarked that his songs carried even more depth now, enriched by the trials he had endured. By surviving his darkest chapter, Smokey Robinson had proven not just his resilience as an artist, but his strength as a man. Yet as the years pressed forward, and as time claimed more of the Motown family around him, Smokey would discover that survival itself can carry a heavy, heartbreaking weight. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Smokey Robinson had reached a place few artists ever achieve. He wasn't just a star, he was a legend. His name was synonymous with Motown, with soul music, with the very idea of timeless love songs. Honors poured in from every corner of the music industry. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987, received the Grammy Living Legend Award in 1999, and later, the prestigious Kennedy Center Honors in 2006. These accolades were not mere trophies, they were acknowledgments of Smokey's profound impact on American culture. Presidents, poets, and fellow musicians spoke his name with reverence. Younger artists like Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, and Lionel Richie credited him as a mentor and guiding light. Hip-hop and R&B stars sampled his music, ensuring his influence lived on in new generations. Still, even amid the celebration, Smokey remained remarkably humble. He never boasted about his accomplishments. Instead, he often said that he was simply blessed to do what he loved. To many, he seemed almost untouched by ego, a man whose heart was still anchored in Detroit's North End, where a young boy once dreamed of songs that could last forever. Yet being a living legend carried its own burden. Everywhere he went, Smokey was expected to be perfect, to sing, smile, and embody the golden days of Motown. Behind that glow, however, lay the quiet ache of a man watching time move on, friends disappear, and his own body begin to betray him. As Smokey entered his 70s and 80s, fans continued to flock to his concerts. His voice, though gentler and thinner than in his prime, still carried magic. But it was impossible to ignore the toll of time. His falsetto sometimes wavered, his movements on stage slowed, and his stamina wasn't what it once was. For audiences who grew up with him, the sight of Smokey aging was bittersweet. On one hand, it was a blessing. He was still here, still performing, still reminding everyone of the Motown era's glory. On the other, it was heartbreaking to realize that even legends are mortal. Smokey himself spoke candidly about aging. In interviews, he admitted that he could no longer sing every note the way he used to. He spoke about the aches and challenges of an older body. Yet he never expressed bitterness. Instead, he saw each performance as a gift, a chance to connect with fans who had loved him for decades. But age brought more than physical decline. It also brought emotional weight. The Motown family he had built his life around was shrinking. Marvin Gaye had been gone since 1984. Michael Jackson's sudden death in 2009 left Smokey shaken. Aretha Franklin, a close friend, passed in 2018. Each funeral reminded him that his own time was approaching, that the era they created together was becoming history. For Smokey Robinson, the weight of age was not just about his voice or his body, it was about carrying the memories of a world that no longer existed. While Smokey Robinson's public image was always polished, his personal life was filled with complexities, joys, and heartbreaks. His marriage to Claudette Rogers, though a cornerstone of his early life, ended in divorce in 1986 after nearly 3 decades together. The pressures of fame, constant travel, and the strains of personal loss proved too much to overcome. Smokey later remarried in 2002 to Frances Gladney, a fashion designer. Their relationship brought him stability and companionship in his later years. Frances often accompanied him at public events, quietly supporting him as he continued to perform and accept honors. Family remained central to Smokey's life. He had 3 children, Barry, Tamla, and Trey, and later grandchildren, who gave him a sense of grounding outside of music. Despite the demands of his career, Smokey always spoke with pride about his role as a father and grandfather. Yet there were also regrets. In interviews, Smokey admitted to mistakes in his personal life, including infidelity during his marriage to Claudette. He carried the guilt of those choices, acknowledging the pain they caused. For a man who wrote so beautifully about love, he often struggled to live up to his own lyrics. In his 80s, Smokey found himself reflecting more often on relationships. Those he nurtured, those he lost, and those he wished he had handled differently. Age brought wisdom, but also the sting of knowing that time could not undo past decisions. Still, through all the triumphs and heartbreaks, Smokey remained deeply human. His story was not one of perfection but of perseverance, resilience, and the ability to keep moving forward even when love, fame, and life itself left scars. Smokey Robinson's voice was unlike any other in popular music. Silky, tender, and soulful, It was the instrument that carried generations through love, heartbreak, and joy. But as age set in, the voice that had once soared with effortless falsetto began to change. By his late 70s, Smokey could no longer hit the high notes with the same ease. The shimmering smoothness of his tone had thinned. Yet, even with those changes, his voice carried something new, an emotional depth that only time and experience could give. Fans often said that hearing Smokey sing in his 80s felt like listening to wisdom itself, wrapped in melody. For Smokey, losing some of his vocal range was a painful reality. He admitted in interviews that he couldn't do what he once did on stage. But he never saw this as the end of his artistry. Instead, he adapted, lowering keys, singing more intimately, and relying on the storytelling power of his lyrics. There was tragedy in watching an artist's greatest gift slowly fade. Yet there was also beauty. Smokey's later performances revealed a man unafraid to show vulnerability, unafraid to let his age and humanity color the music. To many fans, this made his songs even more powerful. Still, Smokey sometimes confided that he missed the days when he could sing endlessly, when his voice was limitless. The tragedy of time was that it spares no one, not even the voice that changed the world. As Smokey Robinson entered his 80s, thoughts of mortality became impossible to ignore. He had survived the turbulence of fame, the collapse of relationships, and the losses of countless friends. But in quiet moments, Smokey admitted he often thought about death, not with fear, but with an awareness that his time was drawing closer. He spoke about these feelings with unusual honesty. In interviews, he described himself as grateful for a long life, yet heartbroken that he had to watch so many loved ones go before him. The deaths of Marvin Gaye, Michael Jackson, and Aretha Franklin weighed heavily. Smokey described feeling like the last torchbearer of an era, tasked with carrying memories that the world could never fully understand. At public tributes, he often fought tears while honoring friends who had passed. When Whitney Houston died in 2012, Smokey performed at her memorial, his voice breaking as he remembered her childhood visits to his home. At Aretha Franklin's funeral in 2018, he sang "Really Gonna Miss You," a song he originally wrote for a friend, now transformed into a goodbye for another soul lost too soon. These moments made it clear, Smokey was not just mourning his peers, he was confronting his own mortality. Each funeral, each eulogy, was a reminder that one day, fans and loved ones would gather to say goodbye to him too. For Smokey, the tragedy was not death itself, but the slow countdown toward it, the awareness that each performance, each smile, might be his last. The most shocking reminder of Smokey Robinson's mortality came in 2020, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. At 80 years old, Smokey contracted the virus. His case was severe, so severe that he later admitted he nearly lost his life. In an interview, Smokey recalled how terrifying it was. He described struggling to breathe, lying in a hospital bed unsure if he would ever sing again. Doctors told him he was lucky to survive. "It was touch and go for a while," he confessed. "I didn't know if I was going to make it." For fans, the news was heartbreaking. The thought of losing Smokey to the virus that had already taken so many lives felt unbearable. Prayers poured in from around the world, and when he recovered, the relief was immense. But the experience left Smokey deeply changed. He admitted that COVID-19 forced him to reevaluate his priorities, to slow down, and to cherish life in a way he never had before. He no longer took simple things, breathing, walking, singing, for granted. Still, the near-death experience haunted him. It was a stark reminder that his time was limited, that even a legend could be brought to the edge of death by something invisible. The tragedy of Smokey's COVID scare was not just how close he came to leaving, but how much it revealed about the fragility of life, even for a man who had seemed eternal. Even in his 80s, Smokey Robinson refused to disappear from the stage. Fans would still line up to see him, eager for one more glimpse of the man whose voice had been the soundtrack to their lives. But as he walked out under the stage lights, the changes were undeniable. His once youthful stride was slower, his shoulders slightly hunched, and his breath sometimes caught between songs. Yet, the magic never fully left him. When Smokey sang, audiences still leaned in, as if hearing history itself. The falsetto might have softened, but the emotion was deeper, richer, and more poignant than ever. Fans often wept openly, not only for the music but for the sight of their hero carrying on despite time's cruel hand. The tragedy wasn't in his performance, it was in the reminder that even legends grow frail. Behind closed doors, Smokey Robinson was no longer just the immortal icon. He was a man reflecting on 85 years of life, love, loss, and legacy. In quiet moments at home, he admitted to close friends that regret still haunted him. The years he spent chasing fame at the cost of family time, the relationships strained by the pressures of success, and the mistakes he could never erase. Though surrounded by admirers and accolades, Smokey often felt a loneliness only fame could create. The spotlight had been his constant companion, but when it dimmed, the silence was deafening. At 85, he was still learning how to separate William Robinson, the boy from Detroit, from Smokey Robinson, the legend the world demanded. The tragedy was not only in aging, but in carrying the weight of being loved by millions while still yearning for the simplicity of being loved by a few. For Smokey Robinson, tragedy was not confined to illness or age, it was the fragility of time itself. The boy who once dreamed of singing on street corners had become a world-renowned star, yet nothing could stop the relentless march of years. He had given the world joy, romance, and poetry through his music. But as he grew weaker, it was the fans who carried the sorrow, grieving in advance for the inevitable goodbye. Concertgoers whispered that they weren't just watching a performance, they were witnessing history slowly fade. To see Smokey struggle was heartbreaking. For decades he had been untouchable, timeless. Now, he was living proof that even the most beautiful voices cannot outrun time. If Smokey Robinson's body showed signs of frailty, his legacy remained indestructible. Every generation found something new in his music. Young artists sampled his songs, covered his ballads, and spoke his name with reverence. From Motown to modern R&B, Smokey's fingerprints were everywhere. His words lived on in wedding vows, breakup playlists, and quiet late-night reflections. He was more than a singer, he was the chronicler of love itself. His songs, from the tracks of My Tears to Cruisin, were not just records of the past but eternal time capsules, preserving emotion for generations yet unborn. That was the triumph hidden within the tragedy. Smokey Robinson may one day leave the world, but the music never will. At 85, the tragedy of Smokey Robinson is not only in his aging, fading voice or fragile body, it is in the knowledge that we are closer to losing one of the last great architects of soul. His journey from the streets of Detroit to the halls of musical immortality is both a celebration and a heartbreak. We cry for Smokey because he represents more than a man. He is the soundtrack of countless lives, the poet of love, the gentle falsetto that soothed broken hearts. To see him frail is to confront our own mortality, our own fleeting time. And yet, through the tears, there is gratitude. Gratitude for the songs, the stories, and the spirit he gave so freely. Smokey Robinson's life at 85 reminds us that even in tragedy, there is beauty, and that the echoes of his voice will linger forever, long after the man himself is gone. Thank you for watching this heartfelt journey through the life of Smokey Robinson. His story is filled with joy, heartbreak, triumph, and tragedy, reminding us how precious time truly is. If you were moved by this video and want to see more stories about the legends we love, please don't forget to like this video to show your support. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring life stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us keep these memories alive and continue honoring the icons who shaped music and culture forever. Stay tuned, because there are more stories to be told.